I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here we are. People always tell you that family comes first, that blood is thicker than water, that at the end of the day your parents will always have your back. I believed that for most of my life, until the day my parents sat me down in the office I had practically grown up in and told me I was fired. To give you some context, my parents own a mid-sized family business. Not huge, not a mom-and-pop store either, somewhere in between. Let's just say it was successful enough to put me and my brother through college, pay for nice vacations, and keep us in a comfortable suburban home. I had been working there since I was 16. At first, it was just helping out after school, answering phones, filing papers, running errands. Then in college, I studied business management and came back ready to really take the company to the next level. I poured every ounce of myself into it. I was working 60-hour weeks, often more, barely seeing friends, putting dating on hold, and basically devoting my 20s to making sure my parents' legacy thrived. And it worked. I streamlined operations, cut unnecessary costs, introduced new digital systems that boosted efficiency, and helped us land some of our biggest clients to date. By all accounts, I wasn't just an employee, I was one of the main reasons the company was growing. But here's the kicker. I wasn't the only child working there. My brother, let's call him Jake, was technically employed too. The problem? Jake was the definition of lazy entitlement. He'd show up late, leave early, take mental health days whenever he felt like it, which was often. And yet somehow, my parents treated him like the golden child. If Jake managed to send one email in a day, it was cause for celebration. Meanwhile, I'd be busting my ass from morning to night with little recognition. Still, I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't doing it for praise. I was doing it for the family, for our future. I thought maybe one day my hard work would pay off. Maybe my parents would see who was really invested and hand over leadership to me. Then came the meeting that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon. My parents called me into the office, both sitting there with serious expressions. At first, I thought it was about finances, maybe a new client. But then my dad cleared his throat and said, "We've been looking over the numbers, and we need to make some cuts." My stomach dropped. Cuts? Yes. My mom chimed in, not meeting my eyes. The business has been a little tight, and unfortunately, we have to let someone go. I blinked, still not understanding. Okay, but why are you telling me this? Who are we letting go? Silence. My parents exchanged a look. And then my dad said the words that will forever be burned into my memory. "We're letting you go." I laughed. I actually laughed, because I thought it was some kind of sick joke. "You're firing me? After everything I've done here? You're firing me and keeping Jake?" They avoided my gaze. My mom finally muttered, "Jake needs this job more than you do. You're smart, resourceful, you'll land on your feet." He wouldn't. Felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My chest was tight, my face hot. I had sacrificed years of my life, and they chose the path of least resistance. Their golden boy who could barely show up on time. That day, I walked out of the office and out of their lives. At least, that's what I thought. What I didn't know then was that life had a strange way of flipping the script. Because years later, when their business started to collapse, I was no longer just their son. I was the leader of the very competitor that now had the power to buy them out. And the question I keep asking myself is, when the tables turned, did I do the right thing? Or am I truly the asshole for letting my own parents fail? It started as whispers, the kind of low-level chatter you hear at industry conferences or during casual lunches with clients. At first, I brushed it off. After all, rumors are part of the business world. But the more I listened, the more I realized something wasn't just off with my parents' company. It was unraveling. A client I had once landed for them mentioned offhand that communication had become a nightmare. I email, I call, and half the time I don't even get a response. He complained over lunch one afternoon. It's like no one's steering the ship anymore. Another industry contact said they'd stopped partnering with my parents' business altogether because deadlines weren't being met. I knew exactly why. Jake had never been reliable, and if my parents had handed him the reins, even partially, it was only a matter of time before the cracks became fractures. At the same time, my own career was accelerating. I'd earned a reputation for being the guy who could take chaos and turn it into order. Clients trusted me, executives relied on me, and my new company rewarded me with more responsibility. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just the kid working for his parents. I was my own person, my own professional, and damn good at what I did. But success didn't erase the bitterness. Every time I heard about a mistake my brother made, or a contract my parents lost, a dark part of me felt vindicated. See? You chose him over me. Look how that's working out. I hated that I felt that way, but I couldn't help it. Betrayal leaves scars, and mine hadn't healed. Things really started to unravel when one of their longtime suppliers, someone who had worked with our family business for over a decade, approached me directly. He pulled me aside after a conference and said, "Listen, I know your history with them, but I've got to ask, are you taking on new partners? Because frankly, I can't rely on your parents' company anymore." That hit me like a ton of bricks. Suppliers were the backbone of our operation back in the day. If they were jumping ship, it wasn't just a bad month, it was systemic collapse. I didn't immediately say yes, though I could see the eagerness in his eyes. Instead, I told him I'd talk to my team. That night, lying awake in bed, I realized just how far things had shifted. I wasn't some cast-off son licking his wounds anymore. I was now in a position where people preferred me over the family business. Meanwhile, Jake was still living in Fantasyland. Social media posts showed him partying in Vegas, taking luxury trips, buying a brand new car. I knew the company wasn't doing well, which meant either he was bleeding it dry, or my parents were still funding his lifestyle out of their own pockets. Probably both. It was around this time that I started hearing from extended family, too. A cousin mentioned at a barbecue that my parents seemed stressed all the time. An aunt confided that they'd asked her for a small loan, something they had never done before. It was clear. The empire was crumbling, and everyone could see it except the people clinging to the throne. I should have felt nothing but pity. They were my parents, after all. But instead, I felt this strange mix of satisfaction and dread. Satisfaction because they had made their choice, and now they were paying the price. Dread because I knew sooner or later they'd come to me. And sure enough, they did. The first time my dad reached out, it was subtle. He called me, just to catch up, asking about my job, my life, how I'd been doing. It was the first genuine conversation we'd had in years. But underneath the small talk, I could hear the desperation. The cracks in his voice weren't just from age. They were from fear. I didn't confront him about it then. I just listened, answered politely, and hung up. But when I put the phone down, I couldn't shake the thought. The empire is falling, and they're about to ask me to save it. It didn't take long after that first casual phone call for the truth to surface. A few weeks later, I got an email from my mom. It was short, almost too casual, but I could read between the lines, "Hey honey, your dad and I were wondering if we could grab dinner sometime soon. Just the three of us. We'd love to catch up. Let us know when you're free." I stared at that email for a long time. It had been years since they'd invited me to anything one-on-one. Family holidays, sure. Obligatory birthdays, yes. But dinner? Just me and them? That was new. And I already knew why. Still, a part of me was curious. Another part, if I'm honest, wanted to see them squirm. So I said yes. We met at a quiet restaurant downtown. The kind of place where the lighting is soft and the tables are far enough apart that no one can eavesdrop. My parents were already seated when I walked in. They looked older, tired. My dad's hair had gone grayer. My mom had more lines around her eyes. And for the first time in my life, they didn't look like the confident business owners who had built a company from the ground up. They looked like people who were holding on by their fingernails. We did the usual small talk at first: work, life, how I'd been. I told them about some of my projects, leaving out just how successful things had become for me. I didn't want to rub it in. Finally, my dad cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Son," he said, "we're in a bit of a bind." There it was. My mom placed her hand over his, her voice soft. "The business has had a rough couple of years. Some clients left, expenses piled up, and, well, things aren't looking great. We were hoping you might be able to help." I raised an eyebrow. Help how? They exchanged a look, the same way they had on the day they fired me. Only this time it wasn't authority in their eyes, it was desperation. Well, my dad began. You've always been good at fixing things. You understand the systems, the clients, the operations. Maybe you could come back, even part-time, just to get us through this rough patch. I almost laughed. Come back? After they had tossed me aside like I was nothing? After they had chosen Jake, the human black hole of productivity, over me? But I didn't laugh. Instead, I sat back, folded my arms, and let the silence stretch. Finally, I asked the question that had been burning in my chest for years. Why me? Why not Jake? Isn't he the heir apparent? My mom flinched, my dad sighed. Jake, he's trying. But he's not you. He doesn't have your head for this. He means well. But when it came down to it, I cut in. You chose him over me. Remember? You told me he needed the job more. That I'd land on my feet. The words hung in the air like smoke. My parents didn't respond right away. My mom's eyes glistened, but she said nothing. My dad just stared at the table. I could feel the anger rising in me, the betrayal boiling back to the surface. But mixed with that was something else, power. For the first time, they were the ones asking me for help. The balance had shifted. I leaned forward. So let me get this straight. You fired me to cut costs. You handed the company to Jake, and now that things are falling apart, you want me to swoop in and fix it? Neither of them denied it. That's when it hit me. This was my moment. I had the chance to either save them or let them drown. And the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted more. Because deep down, part of me still craved their approval. But another part, the louder part, wanted to watch them face the consequences of their choices. And as I sat there, looking at the people who had once been my world, I realized I had a decision to make. I didn't give them an answer that night. When the check came, my dad reached for his wallet, but I stopped him. I'll cover it, I said. He looked embarrassed, but I insisted. It wasn't about the money. It was about showing them that I didn't need their support anymore. Driving home, my head was spinning. Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Years of devotion thrown away like garbage, and now they were crawling back, asking me to save them. The other part of me felt conflicted. They were still my parents. They had raised me, clothed me, supported me when I was young. Was I really going to turn my back on them now that they needed me? I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the moment they fired me, hearing the words again and again. Jake needs this job more than you do. That sentence had carved a canyon inside me, one I wasn't sure could ever be filled. The next day, I brought it up with a close friend from work, a guy named Marcus who had become like a brother to me. He listened quietly as I laid everything out. When I finished, he leaned back and whistled low. Man, he said, if this were me, I'd tell them to kick rocks. They made their choice. Yeah, I admitted. But they're my parents. Marcus shrugged. Parents or not, they didn't treat you like family when it counted. They treated you like an employee and a disposable one at that. Now they want you to come riding in like a hero? For what? So Jake can keep sitting on his ass while you do all the work? I couldn't argue with that. Later that week, I met with my mentor at the company, a senior executive who had always taken an interest in my career. When I cautiously explained the situation, he didn't sugarcoat it. Let me be blunt, he said. Helping them could hurt you. If you jump back into that sinking ship, you're risking your own reputation. You've built something solid here. Don't let their mess drag you down. His words echoed in my head. Don't let their mess drag you down. But the real turning point came when I ran into Jake, again purely by chance. I was grabbing coffee downtown when I saw him swaggering out of a bar at 2 in the afternoon. Sunglasses on, shirt half unbuttoned. He spotted me and grinned like a cat who'd just swallowed a canary. Well, he said. Heard Mom and Dad talk to you. They're desperate, huh? He chuckled. Honestly, I hope you say no. Because if you come back, you'll just make me look bad. And I don't need you stealing my thunder again. That's when it clicked. He didn't want me back. Not because he cared about me, but because he was terrified I'd expose how incompetent he really was. And in that moment, something dark and powerful settled over me. I realized I had leverage. For years, they had the power. They could fire me, belittle me, choose him over me. But now, the tables had turned. I wasn't just an option, I was their only option. I didn't know exactly how, but I knew this much. I wasn't going to waste this chance. Whether I helped them or let them drown, I was going to make sure I came out on top this time. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for them to feel the consequences of their betrayal. They called me within a week. My mom's voice on the phone was small, the kind of voice you only hear when someone's pride has been beaten down into a whisper. "We'd like to officially bring you back," she said. "Part-time to start, consultant role. We'll pay you, of course, whatever you think is fair." Hearing the words felt strange, like being handed a crown made of paper. I could have taken it and run, gone in, fixed the immediate problems, taken a bow, and walked away. But I'm not impulsive about things like this anymore. I've learned, painfully, that people rarely give you what you deserve without asking for it. And if I was going to walk back into the house that had kicked me out, I had no intention of doing it on their terms. So I asked for a meeting. We sat down in their office again, the same room where they had told me to leave, and this time I had a pen and a purpose. I laid out conditions, and I watched my parents' expressions go from relief to confusion to gratitude as I listed them. "No more vague responsibilities," I said. "If I come back, I want a contract. Defined role, interim COO, a 6-month term to stabilize operations, clear KPIs, weekly reports to an independent third party, and compensation that reflects the work, market rate plus a performance bonus tied to concrete metrics." My dad opened his mouth, probably to argue, but my mom squeezed his hand. "We can do that," she said. "We'll sign whatever you need." I pushed further. "I'll also need access to all financials, supplier contracts, and client accounts. No surprises. If I'm going to fix things, I need transparency." Silence. Then, reluctantly, they agreed. It was exactly what I wanted, not because I trusted them, but because contracts are anchors. They restrict behavior. They make people accountable in ways words never do. And accountability was the one thing my family's business had been sorely missing. I left the meeting with a contract on my phone and a strange, cold satisfaction. I wasn't naive enough to think this made everything fair. But I was shrewd enough to know that positioning myself legally and operationally inside the company gave me options. Real options. Not just emotional ones. Back at my job, I told my mentor I was going to help, for 6 months only. He tried to talk me out of it again. "Don't get mired in family drama," he warned. "You're doing great where you are." But he knew me well enough to add, "If you're going in, document everything. Protect yourself." And protect myself I did. From the start, I treated the role like a consulting engagement, not a homecoming. I audited their books the first week. I set up metrics the second. I called suppliers the third and negotiated extensions on some payments. I patched processes where I could and stabilized a few key accounts. The work was satisfying in a way that had nothing to do with family. It was problem solving, and I was good at it. Jake predictably hated it. He watched me with a mixture of resentment and fear. He tried to undermine me in staff meetings, made passive-aggressive comments, and once even deleted a spreadsheet I'd prepared, which, thanks to cloud backups, was easily recovered. My parents squashed most of his theatrics at first, grateful for the progress. But I noticed how uncomfortable he was when I asked for weekly updates and insisted on joint client calls. He was used to smiling and pretending. I was used to accountability. There were moments. Late nights in the office, reviewing expense reports, talking to worried employees, when I almost felt like I was back in my 20s, sacrificing for the business I'd once thought was my destiny. But this time, the sacrifice had a different flavor. I was investing time to make the company salvageable, and not necessarily to hand it back. Because while I was fixing leaks, I was also mapping the structure. I learned where the liabilities were, which clients could be convinced to stay, which contracts had escape clauses. I saw the debt covenants that could trigger a default. I noticed suppliers who would pull out if payments missed by 30 days. I began to understand how fragile the whole operation really was. And with that knowledge came options I hadn't had before. I could turn this around and hand it back to them, clean and running. Or I could let it slide into a position where an outside buyer, a buyer like the company I worked for, could make a strategic move. Every day I walked the line between savior and strategist. Every day I told myself I'd wait until the 6 months were up before making any big decisions. But each night I went home knowing something that had never been mine to know before, the power to decide their fate. Was I helping because I forgave them, or because I was biding my time? I didn't know. What I did know was this: I wasn't the same kid who had been fired without a second thought. And now that I held the pen on the contract, I held the power to write the next chapter. By the 3rd month, I knew the business was beyond a simple turnaround. Sure, I had stabilized a few things, secured short-term supplier extensions, renegotiated one client contract, and cut unnecessary expenses. But beneath the surface, the foundation was rotting. The debt load was staggering. My parents had been quietly taking on loans to cover payroll and operations, hiding it from employees and, for the most part, from me. When I finally pried the information out of our accountant, I nearly choked. They weren't just running lean, they were running on fumes, patching holes with borrowed money. Worse, some of those loans had personal guarantees, which meant if the company went under, my parents could lose everything. Their house, their retirement, maybe more. The creditors were circling, too. One afternoon, I found a stack of urgent notices in the office mail. Vendors threatening to cut off supply. Banks demanding immediate payment. Letters marked, "Final warning." My dad had been hiding them in his desk. When I confronted him, he brushed it off. "We've been through worse," he said, his voice tight but unconvincing. "It'll turn around." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the strong businessman who once seemed invincible, but a man drowning in denial. Jake, on the other hand, was oblivious. He was still showing up late, disappearing early, and talking big about expansion plans that were nothing more than pipe dreams. Employees whispered about him behind his back. Some had stopped even going to him for decisions. They came to me instead. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. I had choices now. I could double down, pour myself into fixing this sinking ship, maybe even succeed, but at what cost? 6 months of work had already shown me how deep the damage went. And if I fixed it, what then? Would they suddenly recognize me as the rightful heir? Or would they hand it right back to Jake once the storm passed? On the flip side, I knew something they didn't. My own company had been eyeing acquisitions. We were in growth mode, actively looking for businesses to absorb. And I, sitting on both sides of the table, was in a position to make that happen. The moral dilemma ate at me. Was it betrayal to even consider letting my parents' company fail so that mine could buy it? Or was it justice after what they had done to me? I remembered Marcus's words. They treated you like an employee, not family. And my mentor's warning. Don't let their mess drag you down. But there was another voice, quieter, more insidious. This is your chance. Your revenge. Your redemption. The breaking point came one evening when Jake stumbled into a late meeting, reeking of alcohol, slurring his words. He interrupted me mid-presentation, bragging about some big client he was supposedly bringing in. Everyone in the room exchanged glances. When I later checked his claims, the client didn't even exist. It was a lie, a pathetic attempt to save face. I realized then that if I left things in Jake's hands, the company wouldn't just fail, it would implode. Employees would lose their jobs, clients would scatter, and my parents would be left penniless. And yet, wasn't that the natural consequence of their choices? I drove home that night in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. At a red light, I caught my own reflection in the rearview mirror. My face looked cold, harder than I remembered. I whispered aloud, almost like I was testing the words, "If they fall, maybe it's because they deserve to." And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty saying it. It finally happened on a rainy Thursday evening. I had just wrapped up a brutal 12-hour day when my parents called me into their office. They looked worse than ever. Ashen faces, heavy bags under their eyes, and the kind of desperation you can smell before they even open their mouths. "Sit down," my dad said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I sat, heart pounding. I already knew what was coming. My mom leaned forward, clutching a folder like it was a lifeline. "We can't keep going like this. The creditors, they're closing in. Payroll's late again. If something doesn't change, we'll lose everything." I didn't speak. I just waited. "We need you," my dad finally said. His voice cracked, and I realized I had never heard him sound so fragile. "Not as a consultant. Not part-time. We need you to take over operations, fully. Effective immediately." There it was. The thing I had fantasized about since the day they fired me. Recognition, authority, control. But instead of the rush of vindication I thought I'd feel, all I felt was cold. "Jake?" I asked evenly. My dad rubbed his temples. "He's not cut out for this." The understatement of the century. "We were wrong," my mom whispered, eyes glistening. "We should have never let you go. Please help us save this." For a moment I almost caved. The child in me, the one who had once craved their approval, wanted to say yes to finally get the validation I'd been starved of for years. But the adult in me, the strategist, the man who had clawed his way back from nothing, knew better. Because while they were begging me for salvation, my company had other ideas. A week earlier, I had quietly met with my CEO and a couple of board members. I laid out the situation. My parents' company was bleeding cash, crippled by debt, but still had valuable assets. Client relationships, distribution channels, and a recognizable brand. With the right management, it could be profitable again. They were interested, very interested. "Would they sell?" my CEO asked. "Not yet," I said, "but soon, very soon." The plan was simple. Position myself as their last hope, learn everything about the company's structure, and wait until the pressure became unbearable. Then, when the creditors came knocking, we'd swoop in with a buyout offer. Clean, legal, ruthless. So when my parents begged me that night, I kept my face unreadable. "I'll think about it," I said. My dad frowned. "There's no time to think. We need an answer." I stood, straightened my jacket, and looked him dead in the eye. "Then you should have thought about that before you fired me." The silence was deafening. My mom's lip trembled. My dad's jaw clenched. I walked out without another word. Driving home, I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt conflicted. I wasn't heartless. These were my parents. But every instinct told me that stepping in now would mean being trapped again. Cleaning up Jake's messes, propping up their pride. And I was done being the expendable son. The next morning, I emailed my CEO. "They're breaking. Get the paperwork ready." It all came to a head on a gray Tuesday morning. The office phone rang incessantly, emails pinged without pause, and the sound of my parents' frantic footsteps echoed through the hallways. The creditors weren't waiting any longer. Payroll was overdue. Vendors were threatening legal action. The company was teetering on the edge of collapse, and everyone knew it. My parents were at a loss. They had no contingency plan, no backup. All the years of hubris, favoritism, and blind trust in Jake had finally caught up with them, and now they were staring straight at the abyss. I walked into the office, calm, collected, carrying a folder that held the solution. "You called me," I said softly. My voice sounded foreign even to me. Confident, controlled, almost detached. "Here I am." Their faces lit up with relief, a mixture of hope and guilt. "Oh, thank God," my mom whispered, eyes brimming. "Please, can you help? We don't know what to do." I nodded slowly, flipping open the folder. "I've prepared a plan. We can stabilize things temporarily, satisfy the creditors, and perhaps restructure." My dad leaned forward eagerly. "Anything. Just tell us what to do. We'll follow your lead." I smiled faintly, a cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. "There's a catch," I said. Their expressions froze. "Catch?" "Yes," I continued. "This plan works, but it comes with conditions. I need full control. No interference. I make all decisions. Contracts, finances, operations, everything goes through me. You just have to trust me." The silence was deafening. My parents exchanged a glance, their desperation warring with their pride. "Of course," my mom said finally, her voice trembling. "We trust you." I nodded. "Good. Then we can proceed. But understand this. If this fails, the company will not survive. The creditors will take everything, and I will not intervene again." It was technically true, but I knew something they didn't. They were already too deep in debt. The failure was more likely than not. And if that happened, my company would be in the perfect position to swoop in with a buyout offer. Clean. Legal. I would have all the leverage, and they would have no choice but to accept. Jake predictably looked horrified. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He had spent years coasting, thinking the company was his. Now he realized the game had changed, and I was holding the rules. Over the next week, I executed the first phase of my plan. I contacted key clients, reassured suppliers, prioritized payroll, and documented every decision. My parents watched, anxious and grateful, yet oblivious to the fact that each move I made strengthened my position rather than theirs. The creditors, meanwhile, were placated temporarily. They agreed to defer payments for 2 weeks. That window was all I needed. I began quietly preparing the paperwork for the acquisition, an offer that would appear as a lifeline but in reality would put me in complete control. I looked at my parents one evening, exhausted after a 12-hour day of damage control, and asked softly, "You trust me?" "Yes," they said in unison, almost desperately. I nodded, my mind calculating every angle. Soon enough, they'll realize it's too late. They'll be at my mercy. The ones who fired me, dismissed me, and handed everything to Jake. They'll finally see that the tables have turned. And I wondered, almost to myself, if I could live with the satisfaction of watching it all unfold. Because the truth was, revenge wasn't just an option anymore. It was inevitable. 2 weeks later, the window I had created closed. The creditors were impatient. Suppliers were threatening to pull contracts. And Jake had officially lost any semblance of authority. My parents were cornered, exhausted, and desperate. They came to me in the office, their eyes wide with pleading. "Please," my dad said, voice hoarse. "We can't do this without you. We need your help." I nodded slowly. "I can help," I said. "But the solution has conditions." They agreed immediately, not realizing that the contract I presented wasn't just a lifeline, it was a strategic handover. The terms were favorable to them in the short term, but the company was now positioned for acquisition. The minute they signed, my competitor, my company, had the legal and operational leverage to buy them out. The process was seamless. I orchestrated the paperwork, reassured employees, and presented the deal as a rescue package. My parents, relieved beyond measure, didn't read the fine print closely. They trusted me as I had instructed. And why wouldn't they? I was their child, their savior. A month later, the acquisition was complete. My parents retained symbolic titles, but the real control passed to me and my company. The irony was brutal. The very people who had fired me to save costs were now subordinate to the child they had discarded. Jake was left with a useless title and no authority, facing the reality of his incompetence for the first time. I didn't gloat, at least not openly. The public face of the deal was framed as a rescue, a saving grace. Behind closed doors, however, I finally allowed myself the satisfaction of seeing justice served. They had underestimated me. They had chosen the lazy, the undeserving, the unprepared over the one who had actually built, nurtured, and sustained their legacy. And now the tables had turned. In the days that followed, I reflected on what had happened. Was I the asshole? I had orchestrated events that led to my parents' financial and professional subjugation. But I hadn't cheated, stolen, or lied. I had simply leveraged the knowledge, skill, and position I had earned over years of dedication. And yet, at night, I still felt a twinge of guilt. They were my parents, after all. Could I have helped without taking total control? Maybe. But could I have forgiven them for the betrayal, the years of disregard, The choice of Jake over me? Maybe not. When I sit with the board now, running the company that once belonged to my parents, I sometimes wonder how it will look to outsiders. Am I ruthless? Strategic? Justified? Or am I an asshole? The truth is complicated. But one thing is clear. They taught me a lesson in consequences. And I made sure the lesson stuck. Because in the end, loyalty has its limits. And sometimes justice comes not as a favor, but as a reckoning. AITA,